Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I thought I'd talk a little bit about planetary imaging. It's a type of astrophotography that I've only just recently got into. So I just want to go over some of the very basics that I've sort of gleaned over the last couple of months of doing a bit of planetary astrophotography. Like all astrophotography, it's another discipline and there's nuances that you need to understand along the way. So I just thought we'd have a quick look at my setup, and then what I'm also going to do is I'm actually going to go through and process an image of Saturn. So I'm literally going to process it from the raw video file through to the outputted end stacked file that's been processed, and I'm also going to make that data available. Now it is a big file, it's probably coming in at about 4 gig of data, but I will put it on my Google Drive, and if you want to just have a quick go, then feel free to just download that, and all of the software that I'm using, or at least the main pieces of software, AutoStacker and Registax, is free anyway to download. So if you want to have a go, by all means download that data. So like I said, it's another discipline of astrophotography. So let's have a look what I've got. You know, generally when you look at people who are doing planetary, they've obviously got fairly longish focal lengths. So this is a Celestron C925. You know, I've seen people getting pretty good images with things even as small as Celestron C6s, so 6-inch sort of apertures, and using Barlows on those. I've seen Newtonians getting pretty decent images of planets too. So it's not like you just have to have a huge focal length, but when people do tend to really get into planetary, obviously getting close and the more aperture that you can get, you know, sort of the better. So yeah, this Smith Cassegrain design is often used. This particular one runs at about 2,300 in terms of its focal length. Now, for people who really specialize in planetary, the Maxakov Cassegrains, I can never quite pronounce that, tend to be the one that a lot of people go for. I think there's a few nuances around those scopes that make them ideal for planetary imagery. And they're also very affordable. So some of those, like the Maxakov Cassegrains, which like the 127 aperture, which I think runs at 1500 millimeters in terms of focal length, that's a really affordable scope. So if you're really interested in planetary and you know that's something you're very, you want to specialize in, then I highly recommend looking at those Maxakov Cassegrains as well. For me, I wanted the versatility of something like this Schmidt because I want to use it for deep sky astrophotography as well. So let's just have a quick look at what I've got first. So what we got here happening is we've got Barlows down here, we've got a camera. There's actually a DSLR camera behind me here, and look, if you've got a video mode on your DSLR camera and that's what you've got, then have a go with that first. There's nothing wrong with having a go with your DSLR camera. There's a bit more limitations obviously with your DSLR, and often people will move on to something like one of these little dedicated planetary cameras, which are particularly good for taking high-speed video. So when we're talking about taking images of planets, what we're really talking about is capturing video, usually quite a high frame rate per second, you know, usually kind of at least 30 frames per second or something in that region. And then basically taking that video and using programs and software such as AutoStacker, Registax, to then take the best frames out of that video and then stack those frames and then further process. So that's why these little planetary cameras are very, very useful and important for planetary imaging. And the good thing is they don't cost a fortune either. I can't remember what the price is, for example, of this 224 MC, which is a very popular planetary camera, but it's very affordable, especially when you compare it to like the cooled cameras for deep sky astrophotography. So one of the confusing things sometimes when you first get into planetary is which Barlow do I get and what kind of magnification do I need? So if you search around, the rough rule of thumb that they say is you want to look at your pixel size on your camera. So on this 224, for example, the pixel size is 3.8 microns. 3.8 microns, is that right? I'm pretty sure it's 3.8. And then you want to multiply that figure by 5 and it'll give you your focal ratio. So it kind of then lets you know what Barlow you need. So if we look at this, 3.8 multiplied by 5 brings us pretty close to that f20. So what we can do then is we can think about, well, what Barlow do we need then? So our scope here natively runs at f10. So if we take our 2 times Barlow here, that brings this up to f20 as our focal ratio. So that's pretty good. And we know that it's supposed to be 5 times our pixel size on our camera. So that's how you can get a pretty good indicator as to, it's not an exact science, but that's a pretty good starting point for this. So let's go on to the Barlows next. Again, these range drastically in price. And what I would say is don't go for a really cheap Barlow, because there's no point in having a good telescope and a pretty good camera and then having a really rubbish Barlow. So in this case, this is a 2-element, so a doublet design Barlow, so 2 pieces of glass. So I would recommend at least get yourself a Barlow that's got 2 elements in it, a doublet. And this one's actually not bad. This has taken some pretty decent images. This is actually a 2-inch Barlow, and then it's also got the 1¼ inch adapter. So for planetary imaging, you are going to need a Barlow that's got either the Barlow itself is 1¼ inch or it's got the adapter, because if we can get this back in, because your planetary camera here is going to have this little 1¼ inch fitting on it, which goes nicely, just like an eyepiece, into there and fits into there. The other thing that I'll just say whilst I'm here, I don't want to forget, is make sure with your planetary camera, make sure you get a 1¼ inch little screw-in UV IR cut filter as well. That's very important as well. They're not very expensive and they just screw right into the end there. So this is an example of a fairly affordable Barlow. I can't remember exactly how much this was, but it was around, I think, 80-ish Australian dollars, something like that. Now in here, I've actually got a Celestron 3-element Barlow, so it's a bit better quality, this Barlow, and I think this ran at around 150 Australian dollars, something like that. This is not a detachable design, so the actual Barlow element doesn't unscrew like this one. Now in this case, this is like I said, this is a 3 times Barlow, so it's not actually a natural match for this camera. However, like I said before, I have got a different camera, a different planetary camera, which I also use as a guide camera, which has got pixels that are 5.8 microns in size. So if we use our rule again, 5.8 multiplied by that 5, it brings us close to f30. And if with my 3 times Barlow in my f10 scope, again, that's not a bad match as well. So just a few options there in terms of Barlows and cameras, and that's what this is primarily what I'm using at the moment. Like I said, I'm a beginner, so cross-check this stuff. Go on to Cloudy Nights or one of those other forums and do your own research as well into all of this stuff. So that's the camera type. One of the other things I'll talk about with regards to planetary imaging, which can be difficult, is finding the planet, especially when you've got something like a 3 times Barlow on. Because you can imagine, this is 2002-ish 100 millimeters, so I'm over 6,000 millimeters with a tiny little camera sensor. You won't be able to see it. Maybe I'll unscrew this. So I've got a 3 times Barlow on, puts me at 6,000 millimeters, and I've got a camera sensor. I don't know if if that'll show that size. So it can be pretty hard to find targets in the sky. So there's a few ways to do it. one thing I started off doing is I just got my manual finder scope on here, and I literally unlocked the both axes on my equatorial mount, and I just physically lined up the planet in my guide scope. Now, of course, you've got to make sure your guide scope is aligned with your main scope beforehand, so that's a job that you need to do beforehand. Maybe you do it on the moon or something that's nice and easy, or a bright star, or on a distant object at home. So a lot of people do that. If you can find something like a distant tree or a lamp pole, and make sure that your guide scope's nicely aligned. The next thing you can do is actually what I ended up doing eventually is I put my little finder guide scope on here, which also had a camera on it. But that's only running, of course, at 240 millimeters, my little guide scope and guide camera. So again, I made sure that was perfectly aligned with my main camera by just using a distant object. And then what I was able to do is, using my imaging software like SharpCap, is basically get my planet on my guide scope first, so I know I'm very close, and then I'll switch back to my main camera, and it usually doesn't take you very long then. Another thing that you can do that will help you out is you can use Stellarium. So if you've heard of Stellarium, the planetarium software, you can connect Stellarium to your mount. Then what you can do is you can go and find an object in the sky, and again, you can do it whichever way you want to. You can do a combination of using SharpCap or something. When you've found your object, you can then sync your mount. There's a button in Stellarium, and you can sync your mount to that object. So basically now your mount knows, your mount has taken the information from Stellarium as to where it is, and then you can actually use Stellarium as your go-to functionality. So you can, for example, point to Saturn, and you can just say to Stellarium, there's a slew button in Stellarium, and you can literally get Stellarium to slew to the planet, and you'll know it's going to be close, because again, you can use your little guide scope to get yourself close. You can sync your object, and once you've done that once or twice and synced it and got it dialed in, Stellarium is actually a really nice way just to be able to find your planets. So a couple of tips there just on finding things, which took me a while to get my head around at first. What I'll say next is a dew shield, often very important for something like this big Schmidt-Cassegrain, because this will dew over in no time, and I dare say the Maxikoffs as well. So a dew shield is going to be important. One of the things that I've found is the most important when it comes to planetary imaging is the seeing conditions. So maybe 4 weeks ago, I actually took an image with this 224 camera and this Barlow, and it really did not come out very well at all. And that was mainly because I had a little bit of haze in the sky, and the image was very wobbly. You'll get a lot of atmospheric sort of turbulence and disturbance, and you'll often see your planet is looking very wobbly, looks like it's going in and out of focus. That'll often indicate that you've got poor seeing conditions. So yeah, you need to try, don't just assume that your gear is not very good. Make sure you try the scope and the setup on different nights, and you'll probably see a dramatic difference when you get a night that's got good seeing, because your planet will appear much stiller. The other point that goes hand in hand with that is how high your object is in the sky. So as much as possible, really try and let your object, your planet, get as high as it can in the sky, and that's when you want to be taking it, because it means that you're shooting through far less atmosphere. So that turbulence that we're talking about is going to be reduced. So do make sure you try and take your planets as high as possible. For me, lately, Saturn's been up over 50 degrees, which is great, and Jupiter as well. I got it close to 50 degrees, so that was like ideal. Make sure you let your scope cool down after you take it out. So for me, for example, if I'm going to do planetary imaging, I'll leave this for like at least half an hour. Usually for me, it's been out an hour before I'm starting to image anyway, so that's not an issue. But don't just take your scope straight out and start trying to find a planet, because you'll get a lot of thermal currents going through your scope, because the scope will be at a different temperature to the outside temperature, and that will cause thermal currents. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, I hope that makes some sense to you guys if you're only just starting to get into Planetary. But yeah, I hope that makes a little bit of sense and has maybe made it a little bit clearer as to what are some of the challenges, or what are some of the common questions. The other thing you might have noticed here is I do have an electronic focuser on here. When you find your planet, very small changes in focus, and especially over the course of the night as the temperature might cool down, you'll find that you need to play with your focus a lot. So it's much easier just to have an electronic focuser on, so you can sit inside and just play with that focus point. And I think that's where I'll leave it. So let's get onto the PC now and actually go through and process an image. I'm trying to keep this as short as possible, but I did want to at least show my gear before we just get into processing. So stick with me and let's do some processing now. Alright guys, so here we are in SharpCap, which is the software I'm using for this. As you can see, we've got a video of Saturn already there that's recording. It does look a bit dim there, but we're really just basing it on our histogram. So you want your histogram to be about 40%. And once you get it into the next software, you'll actually find it brightens it up quite a lot. So if you do want to start taking a capture, you've got your start capture button over there on the left, and you can give it a name if you want to. And what you're really trying to do is you're trying to find a balance, so you're trying to get enough frames per second. So usually I'm looking for, it depends, but I'm kind of looking for between, depends what Barlow I'm using, but you know, anywhere between sort of 30 frames a second up through to 80 frames a second. It just depends what combination you're using. Just in terms of, I'll just look at the camera controls up here. So you do want try and have your output frames to SER files, and try and have your color space to RAW 16. I will put some information in the description from SharpCap that explains all of those types. And your capture area, so you also want to get that region of interest cropped in as small as you can. So the sensor I have on this is my ASI 482, which is also why it's a bit dim, because I'm actually running this through my 3x Barlow, so it's pushing it to f30. But you want to bring that region of interest in as small as you can around your planet. So I'm actually brought that into 640 by 480 there, you can see. And then the levers that you've got in terms of controlling your frames per second are your gain and your exposure time. So as I said, in this case, because I'm using a sort of a slower scope at f30 because of that big Barlow, I'm having to push my gain up to 300. Jupiter's not so bad because it's brighter, but in the case of Saturn, I was having to push my gain up here to 300. Although I have found on this sensor, it's nowhere near as noisy as the 224 one that I've got. So trying the 224 the other week, I actually got my gain down to only about 100, which was fine because I was using the 2x Barlow, and the image was, my histogram was sort of 40% anyway. So the point is, you've got those two levers, and you can play around with how much noise you want and how many frames you're taking per second, because there's a cutoff between how noisy your image is, but you can be taking more images per second or more frames per second, and how smooth the image looks, but you're taking less frames, and there's usually a crossover. So that's pretty much basically how SharpCap works there. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to save that file, and we are going to go into our next program. Alright guys, so we have got our SharpCap little video now, which is 4.7 gig, 3 minutes. I'm just going to drag that into Auto Stacker. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So what we can do first is we can click on Analyze. Got it set to planet, and yep, let's click Analyze. Okay, so we've got our quality graph now. Now looking at how it's gone, it's actually got a pretty decent set of what look like reasonably good frames. So I think what we're going to do is, yeah, we've got it set to 15. Let's go for our top. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this first box here. I'm going to pick our top 20% of our frames. And we're also going to select, let's see, 1.5 drizzle. Okay, so what we need to do first now is just click on our grid so we can select, let's have a look at how big we need to make this. Okay, that's going to be too small. Let's check 48. Now you can draw these manually. I think I'm just going to use what has been selected by AutoStacker here. Okay, so now we've loaded our image. What I'm going to do, or what I've done, is I've just clicked on this number here, 48, and this is going to draw our alignment points on our image, so I can choose to place that grid. You can play with whatever you think is the right setting here. In my case, I think 48 is working well. Or you can draw them manually, yeah, but I'm just going to use 48. So let's do that. Bit of a zoom on this, just to make it look a bit bigger for us. Okay, that looks okay. Now then, let's have a look at our settings across in AutoStacker. So we've already done our analyze, and we're going to select our top 20%. That looks good. Now I'm going to select a drizzle of 1.5. Yep, that all looks good. And let's click on stack and see what we get. Alright guys, so as it's imported it into Registacks on this, it does seem to have made it rather a brighten it up. So I might just go to the histogram first and just play by pushing this back a bit. You can see it's moving the black point over to the left. So I might just leave it at that. Okay, so let's have a look at what we can change here. So there's different ways of doing this. I've tried both of these. I've actually had more luck sometimes using this option, but let's just have a play. So what we can start to do is, so we can start to use these sharpen and denoise up and down arrows. It's a bit of trial and error. And then what we can do, so as we push it up, we can then use this slider to see how much we're going to apply to this image. And that's actually looking quite nice, as you can see. And it's a bit of a like I said, trial and error to sort of get a balance where I can definitely see the seeing was better tonight, because really I'm managing to get some nice detail out in this. Sometimes you do need to play with this processing area. If you find it's too small, you can actually increase the size of your processing area as well. And if you click on the image, that's actually going to move the area. So let's have a look. And then if you decide you're not happy with it, what you can do is just right click on the slider. That will take you back to wherever you were. So now we're back to the beginning again. Just so you know, you can, if you're particularly happy with a bunch of settings, you can always save those as a scheme, so you can bring them back at a later date. But anyway, for now, let's have a bit more of a play with this. That first, obviously cranking up this first layer is definitely having a nice effect. Again, I find this a real tricky balance to get right, because you almost start to change the colours a little bit sometimes, I find. But it's got some nice definition in there. Quite liking how this looks. Often this bottom slider has quite a dramatic effect, as you can see. Whoa. So yeah, it's just trial and error. You can spend a lot of time playing with these settings, I've found. And of course you can take this into whatever program afterwards, so you can either denoise it here or you can denoise it you know, in whatever program you prefer afterwards. So look, in this case I think I could play a lot more with this, to be honest, and I'm not really sure where I want to take it, because I think it depends how you like it. I actually kind of like a little bit of granularity in it. I don't like them. I'm not that bothered if they're super smooth, because I actually quite like being able to see that sort of... It's a tricky balance. Maybe for now I'm going to go there. Alright, so when we're happy with what we've got, we could try our RGB balance again. We can see if we think it looks any better. I think not. So let's for now go with that, and we will go do all. So we're going to carry out our process to our entire image first. Yep, and we are then going to go save image. So here we are. The file name, it's not very creative, but that will do for now. And then we can take it on to something like Photoshop or PixInsight, whatever you like to use. Okay everyone, so this is basically the image that we've brought into Photoshop now. So this is our processed image out of Registax. It's a TIFF file that we brought in. I've actually converted it, but it was a TIFF file. And all I did is I basically used Photoshop's auto color. So if you select your image and then go image auto color like that, Photoshop does what it thinks will balance out your channels, so it does its own little automatic action. And what I did is I just used that layer, so I put a second layer in there, but I just brought the opacity down to 51 because it was a bit bright, and I actually kind of liked putting in some of the color from the level below. And then after that I just went to image and I went to adjustments and saturation, and I pushed the saturation up a little bit on these colors. I'm not going to push it up anymore, but I've already done that, so that saturation was pushed up a little bit. And that's pretty much what we've got now. So obviously because of the region of interest and you know the image scale here, it's obviously going to be a fairly small image, so you might want to consider, you know, resampling that now or whatever. But yeah, I'm reasonably happy with that, so I think that's pretty much all for Saturn. So I hope maybe if you're new to planetary imaging, as I am, you may have got something out of that. It's quite a bit of fun doing planetary imaging, and it's something that can actually, once you find the planet, you can actually do relatively quickly. So as always, thanks for watching. Clear skies wherever you are, and I hope you I hope you get some good imaging time in. Alright guys, so I'm sure that was a bit of an information overload and I've probably put too much in this video, but that's finished off the processing. I hope you got something out of that, and by all means I will put the link to that sample data in the description, so go for it and download and have a go yourself. As always, thanks very much for watching my channel. Feel free to leave a like, a comment, and if you want to subscribe, that is also very much appreciated. So thanks very much. I hope you're getting some clear skies, and I will see you next time.